Okay, let's unpack this. We're wading into the bewildering world of bureaucratic red tape that affects some of the most essential community supports in Canada.
We really are.
We're talking about the Canada Revenue Agency and specifically its rules for registered charities.
Yeah, and it gets complicated fast.
Imagine this scenario for a second. An Indigenous community group is trying to address some pretty profound systemic gaps. Maybe they want to set up, a culturally appropriate Meals on Wheels service for their elders, using traditional foods delivered by people who actually speak their language. Or maybe, and this is a big one, they want to start an ambulance service for their remote reserve.
Something tailored to their community.
Exactly.
Huh.
Staffed by people who get cultural safety protocols. The expectation here is that this is nation building, it's necessary, and it should get public support.
Of course.
The reality, far too often, it's a multi-page rejection letter from the CRA. They're told the service is either, and this is the key phrase, too universal, or that the group they want to help is too specific.
It's a real catch-22.
So our mission today is a deep dive into the policy that really creates this conflict. It's CRA Policy Statement, CPS 012. This is the document that dictates which Indigenous-focused organizations can actually qualify as charities. We're going to try to expose the strange and restrictive rules here.
Well, what's fascinating, and what you really need to understand first, is the legal foundation for all of this. Most organizations that serve Aboriginal peoples, they don't really fit neatly into the standard charity boxes, relief of poverty, advancement of education, that sort of thing.
Right.
So the courts decided that they can qualify under this kind of catch-all category, and the definition is other purposes beneficial to the community in a way the law regards as charitable.
Hey, hold on, let me just make sure I'm following that. The definition is basically that it's charitable.
Yeah.
Because the law has previously considered it charitable. That sounds profoundly circular.
It is. It's incredibly circular. And that rigidity is really the engine of the conflict we're exploring. But for any group to register, it also has to pass the public benefit test. This just means providing a tangible benefit to the public as a whole, or a significant section of it.
And I guess the good news, buried in all that jargon, is that the CRA does accept Aboriginal peoples of Canada as a significant section.
Precisely. And that decision is fundamental. It means that, in theory, you can restrict your services to Indigenous peoples and still qualify as a charity.
Okay, so the door is open.
The door is open, but this is the critical distinction. This acceptance mostly holds true when you're dealing with cultural, spiritual, social, or linguistic needs. It dictates the very specific path you have to walk down.
So let's start by walking down that approved path then. Let's talk about the green light list, the kinds of applications that get approved because they lean into that cultural specificity.
Good idea.
One clear area seems to be crisis support. Source material we looked at highlights approvals for things like youth shelters that provide access to elders and traditional teachings, or, say, abuse shelters that offer services in Indigenous languages and use traditional healing.
Right. They recognize the value of culturally appropriate delivery in these really sensitive situations. And you see that same pattern with substance abuse programs. If a counseling center for addiction uses traditional ceremonies, involves elders, and specifically addresses intergenerational trauma,
Which is so unique to Indigenous communities.
exactly, then the CRA approves it. The policy is essentially saying the cultural element, the ceremony, the language, that is what justifies restricting the service to this community.
So it's acknowledging that effective recovery isn't just generic counseling. It has to be culturally informed.
Yes.
Okay, that distinction makes sense. And we see similar logic with certain health organizations, right? They get the green light if they're addressing a medical condition with a particular pattern in Aboriginal communities.
That's the one.
And the big example cited is diabetes prevention. Because Indigenous populations face disproportionately high rates, a targeted program just for them is seen as charitable.
Yeah, and beyond health and crisis, it's things like community building. Youth groups that teach traditional skills, seniors associations that organize gatherings or language classes, drop-in centers, all of that qualifies.
A CRA sees preserving culture as a charitable act in itself.
They do.
And even economic development programs like teaching traditional crafts or helping artisans market their work, they get approved.
As long as that link to cultural preservation is clear, same for legal services that deal with treaty rights and land claims, because that's a unique legal landscape.
Okay, so we've established the foundation. If you frame the need as social, linguistic, cultural, or spiritual, and you're serving Indigenous peoples broadly, you've got a pretty strong case.
You're on solid ground.
Right. Now for the part that causes
Sure.
just immense frustration. If culture is the approved angle, I'm guessing the moment you touch on basic, universally recognized needs, the lights all turn red.
You have absolutely hit the nail on the head. That brings us to the red light list. This is where a service is considered so universally necessary that the CRA argues it just can't be legally restricted to one group, even if culturally appropriate delivery is desperately needed.
Let's get into the specifics of that. What are some of the forbidden categories that, really shock people?
Hospitals.
Hospitals.
Hospitals. Rejected. This is a crucial example. I mean, despite documented severe healthcare disparities, the need for culturally safe facilities, a hospital is deemed a universal benefit. So you can't make an Indigenous-specific one a registered charity.
Unless it's open to everyone in Canada.
Which completely defeats the purpose of building targeted infrastructure for a specific community that needs it.
That is genuinely shocking, especially when you think about how many communities are remote, they lack trusted facilities, and they often face systemic racism when they have to travel for care.
And it doesn't stop with facilities. Ambulance services are rejected.
The exact thing from my opening example.
Yep. Fire protection services are also rejected. It doesn't matter if the nearest fire department is 90 minutes away.
Wait, okay, let me just synthesize this for a second. For you listening, you can run a youth shelter that offers trauma counseling after a fire, and that gets approved, but you can't register the community's fire protection service itself.
That's it.
And you can run a substance abuse recovery center, but not the hospital that treats the person who's in the middle of a medical crisis from that abuse.
You've got it. The policy will fund the symptom, the cultural response to trauma or addiction, but it won't fund the foundational infrastructure that prevents or immediately treats the life-threatening event.
And what about that first scenario I mentioned, the Meals on Wheels?
Rejected. Absolutely rejected.
Why?
The CRA's stance is that delivering food to seniors is too universal. It doesn't matter if the food is traditional, if the social contact is in an Indigenous language, or if the elder is isolated. Meals on Wheels is just categorized as a universal service.
That specific contradiction is it's mind-boggling. It illustrates the frustration of this. You can register a seniors recreational association that has cultural gatherings, and that's approved, but not a Meals on Wheels program for the exact same seniors.
It creates this completely absurd boundary. Social and cultural services are in, but basic tangible necessities are out. If a service is deemed essential for everyone, like an ambulance, it's legally seen as inappropriate to restrict it. Even if, in the real world, access to that very service is wildly unequal for that group.
Okay, so as if that conflict wasn't complicated enough.
Yeah.
Let's get into the rule that catches so many applicants off guard. The class within a class minefield.
This is a true legal trap. It's all about who you are allowed to help. We already said you can serve Aboriginal peoples of Canada. That's the broad approved class. The problem starts when you try to serve a subsection of that group.
Meaning, if I'm part of the Mi'kmaq Nation, I can't start a charity just for the Mi'kmaq people. Or just for my local First Nation band.
That's the default position, and it leads to routine rejections. Limiting beneficiaries to a specific nation, like the Haida, or a single band council, is considered too narrow.
So a charity designed to help Indigenous peoples can't be specific to your own Indigenous people.
It has to, at least in theory, be openly accessible to all Indigenous peoples across Canada.
But, practically why? If a community is trying to rebuild its own governance or revitalize a language that only their elders speak, how could a national charity possibly address that specific local need?
And that's the core conflict.
Yeah.
The CRA's legal framework is trying to stop groups from setting up charities that only benefit private members. They see restricting it to one band as falling into that private, non-public category.
So there's no way around it.
Well, there is a very convoluted escape hatch. They call it the dueling needs clause. An organization can qualify, but only if it can demonstrate that it's addressing a charitable need that is particular to that limited group, a problem faced only by that specific nation.
Ah, the uniqueness requirement. So you have to prove your community's problem is more unique than anyone else's.
Pretty much.
That just seems so counterproductive. Issues like poverty and healthcare gaps are shared problems, but they still require local, culturally specific solutions.
And the examples of what might pass this test are incredibly narrow. The sources mention things like revitalizing Métis, a language that's specific only to the Métis that might pass.
Because no one else speaks it.
Right. Or addressing very specific, unique treaty issues that don't affect other nations. The criteria demands irrefutable uniqueness. You can't just say, we want to help our own community because it's our community. You have to argue that the foundational need is so distinct that other Indigenous communities don't share it.
And that is the awkward catch, isn't it? The real minefield. If the need is common poverty, housing, lack of services, your application fails unless the service is open to all Indigenous peoples across the country. So to get charitable status for your own people, you're basically incentivized to argue that your community's problems are so unique that other Indigenous groups don't suffer in the same way.
It's a bureaucracy-induced contest. It forces communities to emphasize their specific disadvantages just to get funding.
That's the structural barrier right there. The CRA is trying to balance acknowledging the need for culturally specific services.
Which is necessary.
Right. While at the same time applying these old, colonially derived legal frameworks that demand universality for things like hospitals and ambulances.
And if you put it all together, the problem is just so stark. The CRA is willing to fund the things that preserve culture, language, healing, crafts. But they are incredibly restrictive about funding the infrastructure that ensures basic life safety and health equity.
So you can run the culturally focused healing center.
But not the dedicated, culturally safe hospital that might treat the very same person.
So if you're listening right now, maybe you're preparing an application or you just want to understand how this all works, what are the key takeaways, the rules for navigating this based on what we've seen?
I'd say there are 3 main rules.
Okay, first one, play it safe. Stick to the approved cultural, social, and specific health programs. Avoid that forbidden list. No ambulances, no hospitals, no general disaster relief. If it's a universal necessity, the policy is going to reject your restriction.
That's number 1. Number 2 is go broad or go home. Unless you can prove a truly unique need for your specific nation, your application has to say that you serve Indigenous peoples broadly. A small First Nation might have to, in theory, open their youth center to Indigenous people from across the country.
Even if, in reality, everyone who walks through the door is local.
Exactly.
And finally, I assume it's document cultural specificity. Intensely.
That's your leverage. You have to emphasize in every part of your mission how you're incorporating traditional practices, language, elders, cultural elements. That's the only thing that legally justifies restricting the service.
So ultimately, this CRA policy is a masterclass in bureaucratic complexity, isn't it? It's trying to merge good intentions with these really outdated legal structures.
And the result is a system where culturally relevant services are accepted, but the essential, universal services, the basic necessities of life, are rejected if they're restricted, even when access to those very necessities is tragically unequal in the first place.
And that leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to explore. This policy demands that communities prove their problems are distinct and unique just to get support. Instead of acknowledging that shared chronic issues, which all stem from historical context, require culturally appropriate community-specific solutions. So the question is, when does the legal requirement for universal benefit stop protecting the public interest and start actively creating a structural barrier against targeted necessary care? It's a conflict that really continues to define the relationship between Canadian governance and Indigenous nation building.